Christmas is the time of year when the lights shine brighter, the streets are colorful and joy seems to spread even to the most closed hearts. But not all brightness brings comfort. For some people, the end-of-year celebrations are accompanied by experiences that defy logic, common sense, and, in some cases, even sanity. Today, I invite you to explore the darker side of Christmas, a side that few dare to face. Behind the cheerful music and carefully wrapped gifts, there are scary and inexplicable stories that make us question the true meaning of this time of year. In this video, you will hear 3 real stories that turned moments of Christmas joy into nights of pure terror. From unexplained sounds in an isolated cabin to a gift that no one would like to receive, each story carries mystery, suspense, and a warning. Not all Christmas traditions bring happiness. What makes these stories so captivating is their connection to real life. They come from true stories, shared by people who claim to have lived through these frightening experiences. Of course, it's always easier to doubt than to believe, but are you ready to face what they have to say? Imagine yourself sitting around a fireplace, surrounded by friends and family. Outside, the wind whistles and the snow falls gently. Now, imagine that, instead of hearing stories of togetherness and joy, you come across stories that make your heart beat faster, your body shiver, and your mind question what is real and what is just imagination. If this has piqued your curiosity, get ready. We're going to dive into a world where the spirit of Christmas meets the supernatural. Each story has been handpicked to take you on a journey full of twists, scares, and moments of tension. And don't worry, I'm not here just to scare you. These stories also offer reflections on what it means to face the unknown and how fear can reveal things about ourselves that we never imagined. Are you ready to begin? Stay with me until the end, because I promise the last story will be the most disturbing of all. Maybe, after today, you will never see Christmas the same way again. For many families, Christmas is a time to create special memories in peaceful, welcoming places. That was the plan for Jack and Sarah, a young couple who decided to take their 2 children, Ellie and Max, to a secluded cabin in a snow-covered forest. They wanted to escape the chaos of the city and enjoy a Christmas in complete peace. The cabin, rented through an app, seemed perfect, built of sturdy wood, with a cozy fireplace and large windows that allowed views of the bright white landscape outside. The place had everything to be an ideal getaway. However, from the beginning of the trip, small details bothered Jack. The road to the cabin was narrower and winding than he expected. Tall trees surrounded the path, and the silence was so absolute that it seemed heavy in the air. Even so, they arrived without any major problems, eager to begin the festivities. As soon as they entered the cabin, Sarah felt a chill. Although the environment was visually welcoming, there was something inexplicably strange about the place. Maybe it was the smell of old wood, or the fact that the natural light coming through the windows seemed weaker than it should have been. But she ignored the discomfort, attributing it to the fatigue of the trip. The first night, everything seemed perfect. They put up a small Christmas tree, sang traditional carols, and made hot chocolate. The children laughed and ran around the living room while Jack lit the fire. When they finally went to sleep, a sense of tranquility filled the house. But that peace was interrupted a few hours later. Jack was the first to hear it. Light, almost imperceptible footsteps that seemed to be coming from outside the cabin. He got up, put on his coat, and peered out the window. All he saw was the darkness of the forest, lit only by the distant glow of the moon. Convinced that it must be an animal, he went back to bed, but he couldn't sleep soundly. The next morning, when he went out to collect firewood, he found something disturbing. In the snow around the cabin, there were footprints. They weren't from any ordinary animal. They looked human, but they were too small to be those of an adult. Stranger still was the fact that the footprints began and ended abruptly, leading nowhere. Jack decided not to tell Sarah or the children, fearing that it would ruin the Christmas spirit. However, throughout the day, he could not get the image out of his head. On the second night, what had been mere uneasiness turned into real fear. Strange sounds began to echo through the forest. The snapping of branches, whispers that seemed to be carried by the wind. Ellie, the oldest daughter, woke up in the middle of the night crying, saying that she had seen someone outside the window. Jack tried to reassure her that it was just a bad dream. Sarah, however, could no longer ignore the feeling that something was wrong. She confronted Jack, and he finally told her about the footprints. They decided together that if anything else happened, they would leave the cabin earlier than planned. On the third night, while everyone was sitting at the table having dinner, they heard a knock on the door. A loud knock that echoed throughout the house. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Jack hesitantly walked to the door and carefully opened it. There was no one outside. Only a note stuck to the wood with a rusty nail. With trembling hands, he pulled the note out and read it aloud. "You shouldn't be here." Jack slowly backed away, slamming the door shut and locking it. The note trembled in his hands as he tried to process the words he had just read. Sarah saw the look of terror on her husband's face and asked to see the note. His response was immediate. "We have to get out of here, Jack. Tomorrow, as soon as the sun comes up." Ellie and Max, still young, noticed their parents' nervousness, but they didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Jack tried to calm them down with a simple explanation. "It's just a bad joke. We'll leave tomorrow, but tonight we'll be safe in here." He didn't fully believe his own words, but he felt he needed to keep calm for the family. They decided to sleep all together in the living room, with the fireplace lit. Jack and Sarah kept watch, taking turns to make sure nothing happened. The silence outside was unsettling, as if the forest were waiting. Shortly after midnight, while Sarah and Jack were alone, he resumed his steps. This time, however, they were closer and heavier. He spoke slowly, grabbed an iron heater from the fireplace, and walked to the nearest window. What he saw made his blood run cold. At the edge of the forest, in the dim moonlight, stood a figure. It looked like an adult, but it was completely still, like a statue. Jack blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the figure appeared there, staring straight at the cabin. He went back into the living room, woke Sarah, and whispered what he had seen. "There's someone out there, at the edge of the forest. They're watching us." Sarah tried to look out the window, but the figure was no longer there. The rest of the night passed slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. They heard other sounds, dark sounds on the outside walls, whispers that seemed to come from the shadows. But nothing else happened until dawn. When the sun finally came up, they managed to pack their bags in a hurry. Jack went out to check the car and make sure everything was in order. But as he got closer, he noticed something that made his breath quicken. More footprints around the vehicle, this time clearly those of adults, and all of them leading to the car doors. Without thinking twice, he got in, started the engine, and called the family. Sarah and the children hurried inside, and they drove off, leaving the cabin behind. On the way back, Sarah asked, "Do you think they were people? Or something else?" Jack didn't answer. The truth is, he didn't know. Weeks later, when he reported what had happened to the owner of the cabin, they received an intriguing answer. The man said that no one had lived in that area for years and that it was impossible for anyone to have gotten there without a vehicle. "Are you sure it wasn't just your imagination? The isolation can play tricks." But Jack knew what he had seen. And every time he saw a cabin in a movie or in an advertisement, he felt the same chill that he had that night. Something or someone was in the forest. I knew exactly where they were. Christmas is a time when gifts carry special meaning, symbolizing love, gratitude, and generosity. For Clara, a 25-year-old who had recently moved to a new city, the gift she received that Christmas was supposed to be a comforting reminder of her childhood. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare. Clara lived alone in a small, simply furnished apartment. Her new life was lonely, but she worked hard to create a welcoming environment. On Christmas Eve, a package was left on her doorstep, wrapped in red paper with a gold bow. There was no return address, just a tag with a message, "To Clara, with love." Intrigued, she took the gift inside and placed it under her small Christmas tree, planning to open it the next morning. As she admired the wrapping, a slight unease arose. Who had sent the gift? She didn't have many friends in town and hadn't shared her address with anyone she knew. On Christmas morning, Clara opened the gift with curiosity. Inside the box, she found an antique porcelain doll with glass eyes that looked almost real. The doll wore a faded blue dress and had curly brown hair. Clara found the doll a bit strange, but also intriguing. She assumed it might be a family keepsake, sent by someone who knew her passion for vintage objects. However, as the days went by, strange things began to happen. At first, they were just sensations. Clara felt like she was being watched, even when she was alone. Sometimes, when she walked past the doll, she felt like its eyes had changed direction, as if they were following her around the room. "It's just my imagination," she would tell herself, trying to ignore the discomfort. One night, while Clara was working on her laptop, she heard a soft noise coming from the bookshelf where she had placed the doll. It sounded like something falling to the floor. When she went to check, she found one of her books on the floor, open to a random page. The book was about urban legends, and the page showed a story about cursed objects. Clara laughed nervously, thinking it was all just a coincidence. She put the book back and went to sleep. But that night, her sleep was disturbed by a strange dream. In the dream, she was trapped in her apartment, with a doll sitting in the chair next to her bed, smiling sinisterly. When she woke up, she was in a cold sweat. She looked at the chair and saw that the doll was still there, motionless, but something seemed different. The doll's dress, which had been clean before, now had a small red stain on the fabric. Clara tried to ignore it, thinking it might just be her mind playing tricks after the disturbing dream. The next night, things got worse. Clara woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of soft laughter, like that of a child. She froze in bed, listening intently. The sound was coming from the living room. Gathering her courage, she picked up her cell phone and walked slowly over there. The living room was empty, but the doll was no longer on the shelf. She found it on the floor, slumped on its side, with its head turned towards the door. Clara picked the doll up from the floor with shaking hands and placed it back on the shelf, trying to remain calm. "It's the wind, or maybe I put it down wrong and it fell," she muttered, trying to rationalize what had just happened. But deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Clara decided to investigate. She began by examining the box the doll had been sent in, but found nothing that could indicate its origin. No return address, no additional notes, Nothing that would help her understand who could have sent this gift. Deciding to rid herself of her discomfort, Clara put the doll in a bag and took it to a nearby antique shop, thinking the seller might want to buy it. When she arrived, the shop owner, a calm-looking elderly man, reacted unexpectedly. As soon as Clara took the doll out of the bag, he took a few steps back, as if he had seen something terrible. "Where did you get this from?" he asked, his voice thick with tension. Clara quickly explained the mysterious gift and mentioned the strange occurrences. The man sighed, picking up an old leather-bound book from behind the counter. He opened it to a page with illustrations of antique dolls and began to read aloud. "They say these dolls were used in rituals long ago. Some are considered cursed, carrying with them the energy of whoever owned them." Clara felt a chill run through her body. "Do you think this doll is cursed?" The man nodded slowly. "I don't know who sent this to you, but I can tell you one thing. You shouldn't keep it around." He suggested that Clara dispose of the doll properly by burying it in a remote and secluded location. Clara thanked him for his advice and left the store, but on the way home she began to wonder if it was all just superstition. She hesitated between following the antique dealer's advice or simply throwing it in the trash. That night, Clara decided that she would get rid of the doll the next morning. But before she did, she locked it in a box in the closet, trying to ward off the feeling of being watched. Around 3 a.m., Clara woke up to a sound that seemed to be coming from the closet, soft but insistent knocking. Her heart raced as she stared at the closet door. Suddenly, the knocking stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Clara gathered all her courage and walked to the closet. When she opened the door, she found the box where she had locked the doll empty. And then she heard the sound of childish laughter again, this time coming from behind her. Clara slowly turned around and saw the doll sitting in the chair next to the bed, just like in the dream she had had before. But this time, the doll's glass eyes glowed with frightening brightness, and a deformed smile was etched on its porcelain face. Clara felt a paralyzing chill run through her body. Her feet were glued to the floor, and her heart was hammering as if it wanted to burst out of her chest. The doll had not moved, but its gaze seemed to carry an evil presence, something beyond any logic or explanation. With a strength that came more from panic than courage, Clara grabbed the doll and threw it into a plastic bag, tying it tightly. She decided that she couldn't wait until morning. She had to get rid of it now. She ran to her car, taking the bag with her. The city was quiet at this early hour, and the drive to a remote park seemed endless. Clara drove quickly, glancing at the bag on the passenger seat every now and then, as if expecting something to happen. When she reached the park, she parked the car and hurried out. She found a remote area where the ground was soft enough to dig with a small shovel she kept in the trunk. As she did so, the silence of the night was interrupted by a low, muffled sound coming from inside the bag. It was like laughter, but muffled and broken. Clara tried to ignore it, but her hands were shaking as she kept digging. When the hole was deep enough, she threw the bag in, covered it with dirt, and ran back to her car without looking back. When she got home, exhausted, Clara locked all the doors and windows, feeling a relief mixed with tiredness. She could finally sleep in peace, or so she thought. The next morning, the sun brought a sense of normality. Clara tried to get back to her routine, but she noticed something strange as soon as she entered the living room. On the shelf where the doll used to be, there was a thin layer of dust, except in one place, the exact space where the doll had been placed. Later, when she left for work, Clara felt something on the floor, just after opening the door. It was the same red box with the golden bow. She almost fainted when she recognized the gift she had received for Christmas. This time, the label had a different message. "Did you think you could escape?" Clara dropped the box on the floor and ran to the phone, desperate for help. She called the antique dealer and begged the owner to come to her house. He arrived quickly, bringing with him a set of candles, coarse salt, and an old book. "This is more serious than I thought," the antique dealer said as he prepared what seemed to be a ritual. He explained that the doll was a conduit for something much darker, something that was now connected to Clara, no matter where the doll was. The ritual began with the man drawing symbols on the floor and lighting candles. He instructed Clara to stand in the center of the circle and recite words in a language she did not understand. During the process, Clara felt the temperature of the room drop dramatically, and the shadows in the room seemed to move of their own accord. Halfway through the ritual, a strong wind blew out the candles, and the room was filled with loud, distorted laughter. An invisible presence seemed to circle around them, and Clara felt something touch her shoulder. The antique dealer shouted at her to keep chanting, even as the presence grew more aggressive. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the room grew quiet. The ritual seemed to have worked. "It is done," the antique dealer said wearily. "But you have to be careful. If something like this happens again, seek help immediately." Clara never saw the doll again, but the scars of that experience remained with her. Every Christmas, she avoided any gift that she couldn't track. And some nights, even years later, she would still wake up with the feeling that she was being watched. Snow fell softly over the small town of Alder Creek, covering the streets with a silent white blanket. It was Christmas Eve, and the twinkling lights strung on the houses twinkled like stars lost in the cold night. For Henry, a 42-year-old widower, it was a melancholy time. Ever since his wife died 5 years earlier, the spirit of Christmas had seemed increasingly distant. That night, Henry decided to stay alone in his secluded home in the woods, a quiet retreat where he could avoid the noisy celebrations of the city. He built a log fire, made a hot cup of coffee, and settled into his favorite chair with a book in hand. Around 11:30 p.m., as he was reading, Henry heard something that made his heart stop for a moment. 3 loud knocks on the front door. He stood still, trying to make sense of the sound. Who could be there at this hour? He wasn't expecting visitors, and the snow made it difficult for any vehicle to reach his house. Reluctantly, Henry put the book aside, grabbed a flashlight, and walked to the door. When he opened it, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. A tall man, wrapped in a heavy black coat, his face partially covered by a scarf. His eyes were strangely piercing, shining unsettlingly in the light of the flashlight. "Sorry to bother you," the stranger said in a calm, almost soft voice. "My car broke down on the road. Could you let me in to wait for the tow truck?" Henry hesitated. Something about the man seemed off. But he didn't want to be rude, especially on Christmas Eve. After all, it was snowing outside, and the stranger looked freezing. "Sure, come in. I'll make you something warm," Henry replied, moving aside and allowing the man to enter. The stranger thanked him and removed his coat, revealing simple but impeccably clean clothes. He sat down near the fireplace, holding out his hands to warm himself. "My name is Henry," he said, trying to make conversation. "Mine is Elias," the man replied with a slight smile. As Henry prepared more coffee, he noticed something strange. There were no footprints in the snow outside, at least none that led to his door. He felt a chill run down his spine. Perhaps he was mistaken, but he decided to observe Elias more closely. When he returned to the living room, He handed his visitor a cup and sat in silence, waiting for him to say something more. Elijah seemed at ease, but his gaze wandered around the room, as if he were evaluating every corner. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you live alone here, Henry?" Henry hesitated, uncomfortable with the question. "Yes, just me." Elijah smiled again, but this time the smile seemed empty. "It's a very quiet place. Secluded. I imagine you find a lot of peace here." Before Henry could answer, the lights in the house flickered, and the room was momentarily plunged into darkness. The darkness lasted only a second, but it was enough to make Henry uneasy. He got up quickly, tried to turn the lights back on, and in an almost automatic movement, looked out the window. The snow continued to fall, but there was nothing unusual outside. When he turned around, he found Elias with his eyes fixed on one of the walls, as if he were listening to something in the distance. "Did you hear that?" Elias asked, his tone calm, but his eyes alert. Henry couldn't answer. "No, I didn't hear anything," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I can hear some things in here. Things that don't belong in this world." Elias spoke enigmatically, his tone distant, as if he were speaking more to himself than to Henry. The air in the room grew heavier, and Henry felt a growing sense of unease. The warmth of the fireplace seemed to disappear, replaced by a chill that didn't originate from the snow outside. He was beginning to feel strangely tense, as if he had made a mistake in allowing Elias in. "Maybe you should make yourself more comfortable while you wait for the tow truck," Henry said, trying to change the subject. "I'm going to go check on the generator." But before he could move, Elias stopped him with a gesture. "You won't be needing the generator, Henry." His tone was different, firmer, and Elias's piercing gaze was now fixed on him. Henry felt a pressure on his chest, as if he were being watched in a way that went beyond the physical, as if something inside Elias was trying to invade his mind. "How do you know my name?" Henry asked, his voice now filled with distrust. Elias didn't answer right away. He just remained silent, and it was at that moment that Henry noticed what seemed to be a dark shadow moving across the walls of the room, accompanied by a soft whispering sound. The air seemed to compress around them, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. "You've noticed, haven't you?" Elias finally spoke, his voice now low and grave, "that this house, this place, is not what it seems." The room seemed to spin around Henry, and he tried to hold on to reality, but it seemed to be slowly falling apart. He began to tremble, unsure if what was happening was a nightmare or something much more real and dark. Elias stood up, slowly approaching Henry, who was now in a panic. He felt a sense of life draining from him, as if the very essence of the house was taking over him. The strange man looked at him with a vague smile and said, "I am not what you think I am, Henry. I am something much, much older. And you have already done what you needed to do." Elijah's last sentence echoed in Henry's mind, a frightening revelation that left him paralyzed. He tried to move, but his muscles were immobile. He felt his breathing becoming more labored, and a pressure growing in his chest. With each word of Elias, reality seemed to break, leaving only darkness and cold, as if time itself were stopping. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the room returned to normal. The warmth of the fireplace was restored, and the stranger was gone. Henry looked around in despair. Elias was gone, but the feeling of a supernatural presence still hung in the air. The shadows on the walls were thicker, and the absolute silence of the night seemed more oppressive. He looked at the clock and saw that it was already 0:15. Trying to convince himself that it had all been a hallucination or a trick of the mind, Henry took a deep breath and went to the door to check if there was any clue as to what had really happened. When he opened it, he froze. In the snow that covered the ground outside, there was a trail of footprints, but they were not the footprints of a normal man. They were deep, almost as if someone had stepped directly on the ground, leaving marks of something huge and heavy. The footprints led away from her home, into the dark forest. And then, in the middle of the footprints, a message was written in the snow. "You invited me into your home. Now you can't escape." After 3 true horror stories, each one darker and more chilling than the last, it becomes clear that Christmas, a time traditionally associated with peace and joy, can hide the mysteries and horrors that surround us. Reality can often be stranger and scarier than any story we can imagine. As we have seen, sometimes the gifts we receive, the places we choose, and even the people we meet, carry within them something much more sinister than they first appear. So, the next time you hear a knock on the door at midnight, or feel uneasy in a quiet environment, remember these stories. It could just be your mind playing tricks, or maybe, just maybe, you have attracted something that should not be there. What would you do if one of these visitors appeared in your life? Thank you for following these stories, and if you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment, share this video with your friends, and, of course, subscribe to the channel for more terrifying content. And remember, in the end, Christmas is not just a time for gifts, but also for remembering that there is more between heaven and earth than we can imagine. Merry Christmas. Or maybe not so much.